Today's lesson is What's in a Name? Names in Everyday Expressions.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mike.
I am Roger, and today we're going to continue talking about idiomatic expressions that use people's names. And remember, last time we mentioned Jack Frost. We also talked about your big signature, your John Hancock. And then we also talked about somebody who likes to look at things secretly. That is a peeping Tom.
That's right. Now, today we're going to have a few other names for you that are also very closely linked to these idiomatic expressions. Again, today, like yesterday, some of them are fictional people. Some of them are actually based on real people from history. So it's going to prove to be very interesting, and we'll give you all sorts of lovely new phrases to use in your conversation to kind of spice things up with your normal communication with people. So let's check out some of these names with idiomatic expressions, or idiomatic expressions with names, I should say. Starting off with the Joneses. Let's check it out.
Keeping up with the Joneses. This phrase describes the social phenomenon in which people try to match the lifestyle and material possessions of their neighbors. It likely uses the name Jones because it's one of the most common English surnames. Nosy Parker. Nosy Parker is an expression used to describe someone who is overly curious about other people's private matters. It's used to emphasize that a person may be too interested in what other people are doing.
大家好，第一部分介绍名词 phenomenon， 它的意思是现象。例如 No one could explain the strange phenomenon that was seen in the sky last night. 没有人能解释昨晚在天空中看到的异象。或者 Lightning is a natural phenomenon that releases a large amount of energy. 闪电是一种释放大量能量的自然现象。接着看到 lifestyle 这个单字，它是名词，表示生活方式。例如The doctor warned the man to change his lifestyle and eating habits. 医生警告该男子需要改变其生活方式及饮食习惯。或是 Caitlin wants nothing more than to enjoy a comfortable, worry-free lifestyle. Caitlin 只想享受舒适、无忧无虑的生活方式。再来看到名词 possession， 它的意思是财产、个人物品，也可以是拥有或是占有的意思。例如Personal possessions should be kept in a safe place. 个人财物应该保存在安全的地方。也可以说 I don't have a copy of the contract in my possession. 我没有那份合约的副本。
Okay, so the first phrase we're going to talk about today is the one called keeping up with the Joneses. Okay, this phrase describes the social phenomenon in which people try to match the lifestyle and material possessions of their neighbors. Okay, so in society, of course, we see other people and they seem to have more than we do. They have a nice car, we don't. They have a nice house, we don't. And we want to be like them. We feel inferior, so we want to catch up with them. So we want to keep up with the Joneses. Okay, Jones is a common English surname. We don't use any other ones. We just use Jones for some reason. And if you keep up with the Joneses, again, you don't want to fall behind your neighbors in terms of material possessions or in terms of their lifestyle. This is a social phenomenon.
Exactly right. Now, of course, if you're keeping up with the Joneses, you're trying to have the same lifestyle as them, and you always feel like the Joneses, this sort of fictional neighbor that you're always comparing yourself to, you always feel that they're doing slightly better than you. Their house is a little bit bigger, their car is a little bit newer and nicer, and you feel this sort of social pressure to try to match their lifestyle. As it says here, a lifestyle is basically how you live your life. It could be a person that we're talking about. It could be a group of people here. We can talk about how having a healthy lifestyle is really good for you, right? You want to be exercising a lot and eating well and sleeping well and that type of thing. You could have a very fast-paced lifestyle. You're always on the go. You're rarely resting. You never spend much time at home, even on the weekends. So that's just how you live your life, the choices that you make, and the things that you fill your life with. And some of the things that you would fill your life with would be possessions, basically things you own. Your house or your apartment, your home is filled with your possessions. You might have a car. That's a pretty big, expensive expensive possession you might own, and I bet inside your car are other possessions. You put other things that you own, a stuff, in other words. So if you're trying to match the lifestyle and material possessions of your neighbors, having the nice car and all the nice things, those would be the possessions. Maybe being able to take 3 holidays a year or go out to eat in fancy restaurants every weekend. That's the lifestyle that you're trying to compare yourself to. And of course, it often leads to misery because it might be impossible to keep up with the Joneses. So yeah, people always comparing themselves to neighbors and usually coming up short and feeling unhappy with their lives.
But in any case, this is a social phenomenon. A phenomenon, of course, is something that happens. This is something that happens amongst people. We have natural phenomena. Phenomena is the plural form of this noun, which means things that happen in nature, like a tornado, an earthquake, typhoon. Those are natural phenomena, or a typhoon is a natural phenomenon. Again, this is a phenomenon in which we just don't want to be left behind because everybody else seems to have more stuff than we do, and they have more prestige. So we try to keep up with the Joneses. And it likely uses the name Jones because it's one of the most common English surnames, like Johnson, Smith, Taylor, Miller, etc. Those are common English surnames. And of course, here in Taiwan, Chen, Lin, Gao, Li, those are all common surnames as well.
Absolutely right. Let's move on to the next name that we have here that's often found in an expression, nosy Parker. If someone describes you as a nosy Parker, that's not necessarily a good thing. To be nosy, it's basically the same thing. You're just adding the word Parker there, but nosy is someone who is always getting their nose in other people's business. You're always involving yourself in other people's businesses or affairs or things that don't concern you, things that aren't relevant to you, things that don't affect you. You're always finding out about them and maybe commenting on them. People who gossip, people who spread rumors. People are always saying, did you hear what I just heard? Do you want to hear what I just heard? I just found this thing out about this person we know. And they're kind of telling you things that don't really involve them. They're just sort of interesting and maybe a little bit shocking and exciting, that kind of thing. So someone is often telling you to mind your own business, to keep your nose out of their affairs. They're saying basically you're being nosy or a nosy Parker. So a nosy Parker is an expression used to describe someone who is overly curious about other people's private matters. I think this is an expression you would probably hear a little bit more in the UK rather than North America.
Yeah, I haven't really heard this used very often in the USA before, although when I look at it, I know what it means because I know what the word nosy means. Nosy is similar in meaning to the term to butt in. If you're nosy, you're curious about other things, but if you actually interfere with other people's affairs, then you butt in, and that reminds me of the term to be a butt-in-ski. Quit being such a butt-in-ski. Quit butting in. This is none of your business. Keep out of this.
There you go.
So it's kind of similar here, nosy Parker. And again, it's someone who is overly curious. They're excessively curious about other people's private matters. They need to mind their own business and to keep out. It's used to emphasize that a person may be too interested in what other people are doing. So yeah, if you're nosy or if you're a nosy Parker or if you butt in all the time, you probably are going to make other people feel uncomfortable and they might get angry at you.
Exactly right. So yes, you're emphasizing that this person is too interested in what other people are doing. You're telling them to mind their own business, mind their own beeswax, kids might say, because it kind of sounds like the word business. But yeah, basically, people don't like others involving themselves in things that don't concern them, and that's why we get slightly offended, and we might use a term like nosy Parker, buttinsky, or I guess with a British expression, nosy Parker. Sounds a little bit better.
That's how they would say it, that's for sure.
Sounds a little bit better that way. All right, let's move on from nosy Parker to Typhoid Mary in the next section.
Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary refers to Mary Mallon, an asymptomatic typhoid fever carrier who passed the disease on to others in the early 20th century. Now it's used to describe someone who spreads something bad without knowing it. Nervous Nelly. This is a playful expression used to describe someone who is extremely anxious or easily worried about things. The term characterizes a person as being overly timid, often reacting with unnecessary fear to everyday situations.
第二部分介绍动词 characterize， 表示描述点点点的特性，或是具有点点点特征。我们可以说 Honesty and great customer service characterize this international company. 诚信和完善的顾客服务是这家国际公司的特色。又或者说 The giraffe is usually characterized by its long neck. 长颈鹿通常以长脖子为特征。下一个看到形容词 timid， 它的意思是羞怯的或是胆小的。例如 Hayden is unusually timid around his girlfriend's parents. Hayden 在女友的父母前异常胆怯。又或者说Jerry's cat is very timid and will only come out after everyone has left the room. Jerry 的猫很胆小，只有在大家都离开房间后才会出来。
Okay, let's talk about Typhoid Mary. Typhoid Mary refers to Mary Mallon, an asymptomatic typhoid fever carrier who passed the disease on to others in the early 20th century. Boy, that was a mouthful there. Asymptomatic typhoid fever carrier. What does that exactly mean? Well, it's somebody who carries a disease. They have the bacteria or the virus or whatever, so you're a carrier, and that means other people can become infected by you, so you gotta watch out. And if you're asymptomatic, that means you don't show any symptoms or you don't show any indications that you have this problem, so you don't know you're sick and other people don't know it as well, but you're still spreading the disease.
That's right. Asymptomatic or asymptomatic, as some people would pronounce it. So you're sick with the thing, but you don't feel any effects. You're not sniffling, you're not coughing, you don't have a fever, but you know you're carrying the disease. Often with diseases, you might be asymptomatic for the first few days, and then eventually, you know, your nose gets clogged and you start coughing, and now you're symptomatic, now you're showing the signs. But if you're asymptomatic, you might be walking around completely innocently spreading this disease. That's sort of what happened with Mary Mallon. She carried typhoid fever. I think she was a maid, and she was working with people's food and things like that, maybe cooking in a kitchen. So she passed the disease on to others in the early 20th century. So basically, she was spreading the disease. When you pass something on to others, you are spreading that thing around. You are causing it to have a wider distribution. You can pass on diseases. You might pass on news as well, or pass on information to your coworkers if you hear something from your boss. Basically, you're spreading things around. You're allowing them to move into larger areas. I think the other thing with Mary Mallon was she was caught. She was told not to cook for people, and then she went back and got jobs in other kitchens. She did this several times, and so the authorities basically had to lock her up eventually. This term Typhoid Mary, now it's used to describe someone who spread something bad without knowing it. So this idea of sort of being asymptomatic, being innocently going about your daily life, but doing something bad at the same time. So for example, with COVID, if you weren't taking your temperature and doing your COVID tests and wearing masks in the early days of COVID when everyone was still in the office, if you'd gotten it on the weekend and went to work on Monday, you could be the Typhoid Mary for COVID in your office. All right, let's move on from that, from Typhoid Mary to Nervous Nelly.
Okay, so the next term we're talking about is called Nervous Nelly. Nelly, of course, is a woman's name. And what's a nervous Nelly? Well, this is a playful expression used to describe someone who is extremely anxious or easily worried about things, or simply they're just very nervous, maybe too much so. So maybe you might work with somebody in the office and they're always worried about this or that. You could call them a nervous Nelly. A similar term would be to be an anxious Annie, which is what my mother used to describe people who were, like a nervous Nelly. They were just too busy and too worried about things. They wouldn't mellow out. They wouldn't sit down and relax. They just were worried about everything. So this is what a nervous Nelly is. And again, it's a playful expression, okay? You can use this to describe someone that you know who is like this. And again, they're easily worried about things.
That's right. So this term characterizes a person as being overly timid, maybe overly nervous as well, often reacting with unnecessary fear to everyday situations. So if you have that friend who's always convinced that the worst thing possible is definitely going to happen, even if they're proven wrong again and again and again. They always kind of freak out and start panicking. You can say, hey, don't be such a nervous Nelly. To characterize is basically to describe the main characteristics of something, the nature of something, the features of something. If you're describing a person and giving them certain labels or putting them in certain categories or types, you're characterizing. Oh, he's a sporty guy. He's an artistic guy. She's a very intelligent girl. She's a hardworking girl. Something like that. Just basically we're putting people in categories or giving them labels so that other people understand who we're talking about and the kind of person. So if you describe a person as being overly timid, timid is basically, it could be shy, but it could also be easily frightened. So if you're timid, you might not want to go up to a stranger at a party and introduce yourself. But we could also describe if you have a cat that runs away as soon as someone rings the doorbell, or when the phone rings, the cat is under the bed or something. You can describe maybe your cat as being timid too, shy and nervous to the point of being afraid. So this kind of person, a nervous Nelly, will often react with unnecessary fear to everyday situations, and they're probably constantly being told to calm down by their friends and loved ones who are used to their nervous nature. All right, let's move on to the third final part of the article.
As these expressions show, names aren't just for identifying people. When used in idioms, they bring color and personality to the English language. They can help vividly illustrate characteristics, behaviors, history, and culture, and they can make everyday conversation richer and more engaging.
第三部分我们看到 identify 这个单字，它是动词，指的是认出、识别，也可以是指认的意思。举例来说 The detective identified the suspect caught on camera. 远警认出了摄影机拍到的嫌犯。又或者说 Rosa was able to correctly identify the thief to the police. Rosa 能够向警方正确指认那名小偷。最后看到动词 illustrate， 它表示用例子说明或是阐明。我们可以说 The teacher used a famous study to illustrate his point. 老师用一个著名的研究来说明他的论点。也可以说The accident illustrates the need for more streetlights on this road. 那起事故说明这条路需要更多路灯。
Okay, let's wrap things up now with the third and final part. It says, as these expressions show, names aren't just for identifying people. So we have these as an example here. Names can be something other than just ways to describe people or ways to identify people. We've got John, we've got Jack, we've got Nellie. Those are names, but we can also use these in phrases, and they can be used for purposes other than identifying people. So here the verb to identify just means to apply the recognition that you have for somebody, basically to label them, to know what their name is, and to be able to tell what something is. For example, if you want some information on the internet or something, someone might ask you to identify yourself. Please tell us who you are before we give you this information.
All right, that totally makes sense. When used in idioms, they bring color and personality to the English language. Absolutely, as many idioms do. They just are interesting ways of expressing common ideas, ways that people will understand easily if you use the idiom and they know the idiom. That's all you'll have to say. You won't have to describe the situation. You just have to say, oh, I was going to take the plane, but my wife is such a nervous Nelly, we decided to take the train. I don't have to tell you how my wife has a fear of flying or something like that. Just using the term helps you communicate very efficiently and effectively. They can help vividly illustrate characteristics, behaviors, history, and culture, and they can make everyday conversation richer and more engaging. Absolutely true. These idioms, especially the ones with names, can help vividly illustrate characteristics, behaviors, history, and culture. When we're illustrating things, we're basically describing them and then bringing a little bit more information, a little bit more interest to them, providing you with the basic facts and also some sort of outside facts, some supporting fact to make you understand it further, to give you a fuller, more interesting picture. So you can use these idioms to do that. And they also, as a sort of side benefit, make everyday conversation richer and more engaging, make you a more interesting person to talk to, in other words.
Indeed, and I'm sure all of you can think of some examples in your own language where this is used. I believe it's common in all languages around the world. Okay, we're at the end of our lesson for today. Let's hear first from Hanny.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分先介绍了 keeping up with the Joneses 这个用语。那么 keep up with 是指跟上赶上，与什么并驾齐驱，像是 Can you slow down a bit? I can't keep up with you. 你可以慢一点吗？我跟不上你。好，那么还有像如果我们用 keep up with the news 就是指跟上时事。好，另外补充一下，我们还可以用 keep up with somebody 来表达与某人保持联系，这时候就相当于 keep in touch with somebody， 像是 I keep up with my friends through Facebook， 我透过脸书与朋友保持联系。好，课文接着提到说 keeping up with the Joneses 这个说法是在描述人们试图匹敌邻居的生活方式和物质财产的社会现象。那文中它用到 possession 来表达这个财产个人物品，这时候它是可数用法哦。那 possession 也可以当不可数名词来指拥有占有。好，那这个名词它其实是来自动词 possess， 我们就来学习它的字首字根。好，看到 sess 或者是 sed、SID、SIDE 这一类的字根，它有 sit 就是做或是就做的意思，那它们带有保持在某种状态的含义。在 possess 这个字当中，字首 POS 它表示具有掌控力， SESS 表示做。那同学们也许可以用坐拥掌控权去联想到 possess 它有支配、持有、拥有、占有的意思。那我们顺便补充几个有相同字根的单字。第一个是 session， 它的字根 SESS 表示坐， ION 是名词字尾。那同学们可以试着想想看，什么场合需要大家坐下来呢？那通常就是有开会集会的时候，而 session 这个字就有会议、会期的意思，那它也可以指从事某项活动的一段时间或者是一节。好，第二个补充的是 obsess， 它的字首 OB 有对抗的意思，那么字根 SESS 表示做。那同学们可以试着联想，当你看到心爱的偶像，就好像你被他困坐在那里，完全无法抵抗他的魅力的感觉，那整个人都被迷住了。用这个画面去联想 obsess， 它有着迷、迷住的意思。好，那第三个补充的是 assess， 它的字首 AS 是来自 AD 表示朝向，那么字根 SESS 表示坐。assess 这个字的典故其实是从字面意思坐在一旁来描述法官助理在旁边协助处理罚款或者是税款的事情，那主要是去估算财产价值才知道要付多少的税款，因此呢 assess 这个动词就有估价、评估或者是评价的意思。好，那么以上今天重点整理，我们就来回顾今天的单字吧。
Phenomenon. The northern lights are a natural phenomenon in which brightly colored lights dance across the sky. Possession. Laura's large library of books is her most valued possession. Carrier. Mosquitoes are carriers of various diseases that they can spread to humans through their bites. Characterize. Milton objected when Molly characterized him as selfish and greedy. Timid. Rosie expressed her opinion in front of the large audience and spoke in a timid voice. Identify. The license plate number helped identify the vehicle involved in the accident. Illustrate. The professor illustrated his point with a practical example.
Discussion Starter starts now!
And here's our discussion starter for today. The question is, can you think of another idiomatic expression in any language that uses a name? What type of person or situation is the expression used to describe?
the one I could think of is probably, I don't know if actually it's the oldest one, but compared to the ones we've read about real people, it's older than them. Your Achilles heel. Achilles, of course, the great warrior from the ancient Greek myth or story or legend of the Iliad, right? Fighting for the city of Troy. Achilles was very, very powerful, had been dipped in the river Styx by his mother to make him basically invincible, to make him unable to be hurt. Unfortunately, she held him by the ankles when she dipped him in the magic water, and then eventually years later, as a warrior, he got an arrow in the ankle, in that one unprotected part of his body, and subsequently died. So we use the expression your Achilles heel to talk about that one weakness in your otherwise perfect armor, that one area where you're not quite as strong as in others, and it could be that area, that weak area, that brings you down.
That poor guy. Well, the idiom that I'm thinking of, another term with John, would be John Doe. That will be just a common person.
Right.
And the female version, I believe, is Jane Doe.
Yeah, I've also heard John Q. Public.
That too.
Talk
yeah.
about just your average person as well. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.